Welcome to Inside Startup Investing, the only podcast where you can invest in every guest. On this episode, I will be speaking with the CEO of Breath Diagnostics, Ivan Lo. Breath Diagnostics is currently raising on Equifund, and you can invest until March 31st, 2026. So what is Breath Diagnostics? Well, you've probably seen commercials for Cologuard, the at-home test for detecting colorectal cancer early. At-home testing and early-stage detection of various cancers is growing rapidly because time and again, the best cure that oncologists find for treating cancer is to simply catch the cancer sooner. The earlier, the better. That is where Breath Diagnostics comes in. They have developed the Cologuard of lung cancer for detecting early-stage lung cancer with quite simply a breath. And by the way, it might have the capability to detect pneumonia, tuberculosis, and other diseases as well with their patented platform. A technology like this is not easy to bring to market, and this team has been at it for many years already with a long road ahead. The FDA approval process to bring this to market will take 3 to 4 years for the pneumonia indication and 3 to 4 more for lung cancer. However, this is a little bit like the Hevo investment opportunity we discussed a few months back, if you listen to that episode, where once they get through all the clearances, this is the type of product that will see a fairly quick uptake, since there is really nothing in market like it, and there is a massive unmet need to have earlier and better detection of lung cancer, one of the leading categories in terms of cancer-related deaths. Fortunately, the team has brought on a seasoned capital market executive to maneuver the costly and challenging journey ahead to set Breath Diagnostics up for a shot at providing a life-saving product in a multi-billion-dollar category. So while the journey ahead will not be easy, this is a company building a powerful new technology with some amazing data to date to suggest opportunity ahead in a category of cancer that is beckoning for a new solution. With that, let's get on to the show and welcome Ivan Lo. Ivan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris. Nice to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. You have a really, really interesting company here. So let's get into it. Tell us a little bit about what Breath Diagnostics is and how you came to found it.
So I didn't find the company. Actually, a couple of really smart people did. But I got involved in the company about 3 years ago when we saw an opportunity to help the diagnostic platform that they were building really expand. And I think one of the challenges with not just life scientists, but across the sector, across all different sectors, is that you have some really brilliant founders and really brilliant physicians. But from the business side, because they've been so ingrained in their academia work and the clinical work, that they don't understand how to kind of move a business forward. So one of those challenges is obviously financing. And so we had to restructure the company. And now that we're ready to not just get financed, but we're aggressively pursuing a lot of our opportunities that's available to us.
Understood. For those who don't know, tell us a little bit about what Breath Diagnostics actually is.
So over the last 10 years, the ability to detect diseases with the breath, there's been multiple research papers that have come out that is showing that we can not just detect diseases with the breath, but that breath may be a better and earlier indicator of disease versus things like liquid biopsy. So what Breath Diagnostics does, what our company does, is it allows us to collect the breath and analyze that breath in the most repeatable, the most quantifiable, and most accurate and reliable way possible. So we have the ability with one breath to detect a multitude of different diseases. And we're probably, when it comes to the detection of lung cancer and early stage lung cancer specifically, the most published breath diagnostics platform for that purpose.
So first off, help me understand what things you can extract from the breath that could, indicate underlying cancers or things of that nature.
Sure. Why don't we, I guess the simplest way to understand it from your perspective is how it works as a patient. So you come into a clinician's lab and you breathe in a bag, and all it takes is one exhale. So it takes you 30 seconds. And so it's like blowing into a balloon. And what happens is we take that balloon and so inside your breath are a bunch of volatile organic compounds called VOCs. And these are byproducts of inflammation, these are byproducts of infection, and even tumor metabolism. And so it's actually really interesting, and I may be jumping a little bit ahead of myself here, but because it's not diluted, your breath, these volatile organic compounds, they reflect almost real-time changes. So we see these changes in your body biologically minutes to hours after a change, after a biological change, not, for example, many months or years later, as is the case with a lot of things, including liquid biopsies. So the biggest advantage of breath, because these volatile organic compounds exist, and in layman terms, for example, when we're talking about lung cancer, that tumor within that lung cancer expels through its metabolism a lot of these VOCs, and we can capture these VOCs within the breath. Now, to give you an example, when it comes to liquid biopsies, which everybody's starting to become quite familiar with and has been kind of the rage over the past, call it 5-10 years, billions of dollars poured into it. When you're looking at the blood, your blood is filtered out. It's like detecting a drop of ink in a swimming pool, right? In the swimming pool, there's chlorine that cleans it out. There's your pool guy, there's the filters. Well, your body's the same thing, right? Your liver, your kidneys, your immune system filters out all those signals. And so by the time someone actually draws blood, those signals are very hard to detect. So even in the lab, most people don't realize when you're looking for something very specific like cancers in the blood, that analysis time takes sometimes a couple of weeks. So whereas the breath, we can do it within 10 minutes.
Now, something I've seen with some of these kind of early stage detection technologies, right? I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with like Cologuard, right? That you could get at home for colorectal cancer. Is that they're a great first test, but then you'll have to do a backup test behind it to like really confirm if you have something. Does this fall into that same category? And if so, when in the process of detection would something like this be utilized over a liquid test or something else?
I think as the first line of defense. So Cologuard, some of the liquid biopsies, they're trying to use liquid biopsies for screening, only they're much more specific than they are sensitive. So when it comes to like Cologuard, they're looking at the DNA, they're looking at genomics, right? Whereas liquid biopsies are looking inside the blood itself, also looking for these biomarkers. Breath is, again, because it's so early stage, we'd like it to be the first line of defense.
And do you have a thought on, in terms of like today, or maybe go back even like a decade ago, if in order to know you had some sort of cancer, you had to do some very stringent tests, the odds that you would do it until later on would be much lower, right? Is something like breath diagnostics, like when you think long-term for it, is this something that becomes ubiquitous in, your annual patient visit at your physician? Or is this still something where you're showing signs of some issue and we go, okay, let's use this as a first line to figure out if you might have something?
Yeah, I think that's a nail on the head. When it comes to lung cancer specifically, so there is a current standard of care for lung cancer, but even that standard of care wasn't implemented till 10 years ago, right? It's relatively new in lung cancer field to actually screen for lung cancer. The problem with the current standard of care is, for example, if you walk into a clinic or you walk into your doctor's office, you're likely either showing symptoms or no symptoms. But what a doctor will do is when they take a low-dose CT scan, they can see a nodule in your lung. Now, if that nodule is small, the chances of them saying it's lung cancer are very low. So what they make you do is come back in 6 months, come back in a year, do another follow-up test, and then do another one, and then do another one. And if it hasn't grown in about 2 years, then we can say it's a benign tumor. But what if it isn't, right? And I'll give you an example on why I want to kind of stress the importance of having a breath test like this and the ease of use is we can arguably use it not just as a screening tool, but as a monitoring tool. So my father passed away from he caught lung cancer, but we caught it actually quite early, which we were surprised because he had symptoms. And I believe we caught it at stage 2. And so he beat cancer the first time, went through chemo, went through radiation, all that kind of stuff. And then over the course of the next 2-3 years, all the scans showed negative. So after about 5 years, that's kind of the survival rate. Like if you can go past 5 years after catching lung cancer, you're considered a rock star. He was a rock star. But then in that 5th year, the lung cancer came back. And by the time they had scanned it again, because the more you scan over the course of the 3, 4, 5 years, the longer that scan becomes. Like you wait 6 months, then you wait a year, then you wait 2 years. By the time I had come back, it was too late. It had metastasized to his brain, and that was kind of the end of the line. And so even with our studies, so one of the last studies we did on lung cancer that was published, there was a subset of about 30 some odd patients who we knew had a lung cancer. And we took the breath sample. It showed positive as having lung cancer. We cut that lung cancer out, and then all of those biomarkers dropped. So ideally, after that scenario, from a monitoring perspective, we would love for someone, even if they had lung cancer and they cut it out, if it's as simple as breathing into a bag or like breathing into a balloon, like you could do this every month. And then you will really catch it at the stage where you can still treat it before it metastasizes, because cancer is such a tricky disease, and it's always hidden from us. And to that point, when it comes to lung cancer screening, because of that pathway of the standard of care where you have to do multiple scans, there's a lot of false positives in the first one. It's very sensitive, but only 6% of the people who actually qualify for lung cancer screening actually get it. But when you talk about breast cancer, colon cancer, and prostate cancer, those compliance rate, the people who qualify who actually get screened are 65 to 85%. But lung cancer kills more than all of those cancers combined. But the compliance rate is just 6%. And that's probably why it kills more people than all the other cancers.
When we think about how far you all have come, I believe the company was founded in 2015, so it's been around for more than a decade now. Where are you in terms of getting to a place where you could actually commercialize this and put this in practice?
That's a great question. So one of the challenges has always been funding. And when you're going after lung cancer screening, you're going against the standard of care. So that requires a lot of patients, a lot of capital. And because of the standard of care, whereby, let's say we had in a clinical trial, we took our last patient in, but we might have to follow up with that last patient for 2 years. So it's a lot to ask for investors who are investing in these type of technologies. So the last 10 years, we've had a lot of development. We have prototypes built. We have a lot of new clinical studies. So our challenge has always been, well, how do we raise the capital that's necessary to move this forward? So our chief medical officer, he's super well respected in the industry. He's a honorary chair at the American Lung Association. So people really respect him. And he said they gave him a bunch of money, say, go test what you want to test to help the medical community. And he actually started looking at if we can use our technology to detect pneumonia. Interestingly enough, it proves our point. They just completed a study about 2 months ago that shows we can predict post-op pneumonia. Now it's early, but why is that significant for us in terms of the pathway to FDA approval and to get this commercialized as a platform, not just for lung cancer, but for all kinds of diseases? Is for many years we've said, we might be so early at detecting lung cancer that no current standard of care can define it until it's too late, until the tumor's grown, etc. With this test, it shows that we can actually predict the onset of disease, arguably minutes to hours before it occurs, versus by the time you have symptoms, for example, with pneumonia. And so right now our pathway forward, because there's no current standard of care in being able to predict pneumonia in post-surgical care, we might be able to take that platform, get FDA approval much quicker. And because there's no standard of care, the trial size is much lower. The follow-up period for pneumonia is like 10 days versus 2 years. And so we could arguably have a commercialized platform for this within the next year.
And then in terms of lung cancer, how many more years do you think it'll be before you could get approval for that? And then layering on, what is the business model? What will it look like?
That's a big question, because we are a platform-based technology. When it comes to lung cancer, you're always going to have to compete with that standard of care. So that's still always going to be 3 years from the day you start your clinical trial. But there are other things we can tack onto that. For example, and I think this is the future of diagnostics, just like it has been for drugs over the last 10 years, where, for example, HIV drug, you don't just, I think it's a cocktail of like 5 different drugs, but independently, they don't help people with HIV. But collectively, they do. And I think diagnostics is going down that same path, where if we can get to market sooner, for example, not as a screening device, but as a companion diagnostic device, we can get there much, much sooner. So, for example, liquid biopsies, they're not very sensitive, but they're very specific. We're quite sensitive and quite specific, but if you combine the two together, you go in for your blood draw, but you also give a breath. There's an argument to be made that not only can we get to market quicker, but we can use this as kind of a cocktail of diagnostic approaches that's simple for the patient, it's quick and easy, but you get a much more accurate definition of what you might have or what you might not have. And so from a business model perspective, because, and this is the case right now, and we're continually doing studies, so it might change, but we're going to aggressively pursue the commercial pathway for predicting post-op pneumonia. And that's super critical because then we'd be selling, from a business model perspective, we'd be selling to the hospitals, because every patient we can predict and prevent pneumonia would save them a lot. Like, we're talking, if you go across all major surgeries, we're talking in the tens of billions of dollars that we could save them.
When you think about the learnings that you've been able to take from all of these years, I think you've worked in over 800 patients with this diagnostics product. And you talk about being able to look at other things. Pneumonia is one of them, but I think you've also mentioned tuberculosis and other things as well. How far is the science from being able to, look at a much broader schema of underlying cancers and other diseases through this diagnostics tool too?
Chris, it's like you kind of know what we're doing internally without having to know. So there's been a lot of work, for example, in the pharma industry on biologics and looking at biomarkers associated with drugs and, pharmacodynamics. And we have a competitor that has done a lot of these studies with these major groups. But the challenge is the competitor using their breath diagnostic tool is not as accurate as ours, nor is it as simple, right? So we have the ability, and we are going to be aggressively pursuing a lot of sponsored research to be able to use our device internally for research use only for these pharma companies that are looking. So I'll give you an example. One company who's launching an inflammatory drug trial to lower inflammation, they don't really have a way of showing that inflammation is being lowered. They just say, hey, did the patient feel better? That doesn't work out very well in a clinical study setting. But our technology, even based off of our research, so again, we've done a lot of different research, not just for lung cancer, but for other disease states. And all of those papers, and not just our own, including our competitors, there's a few biomarkers that we can accurately capture better than everybody else. That is a sign of inflammation. And has been shown, for example, one of those biomarkers is a biomarker called 2-butanone. And in that study that I told you about where we cut the cancer out, that was the biomarker that took the longest to drop. So it dropped, but it dropped over a course of a certain amount of time, and it got lower and lower over the course of weeks. Again, evidencing that it is an inflammatory marker. So we can help with those, and we can help a lot with the pharma companies in their pursuit of getting these drugs to the market.
Capital-wise, what level of capital resources do you think it's going to take to get you over the hump to be able to get FDA approval on the lung cancer side and start generating revenues from that business line?
On the lung cancer screening side, because you have to do a really big trial, so likely 15 to 20,000 patients, depending on the disease prevalence rate, that is probably between $15 and $20 million. That sounds like a lot of money, but when you talk about medtech devices and standard of care, it's actually quite cheap and inexpensive. We can arguably do it for less, but every time we tell the healthcare industry how cheap we can do these studies for, they don't believe us, because when you're talking about advanced laboratory developed tests like Grail's blood test, that takes you're talking two-week analysis. It takes a lot of time and a lot of experts, a lot of automation to be able to do those tests. We literally, and I'll give you, our device for the patient is the bag and this microchip here. And this microchip costs us less than $50 to make, and at scale, easily under $30. So you can take this, throw it away, and it's done. And all the existing technologies that are used to analyze a sample, we don't have to compete with those guys. We just use their product. So it's something called liquid chromatography mass spectrometry. These are companies that are worth billions of dollars making these machines. We're not going to try to create our own like some of the other our competitors are. So we can do it arguably for cheaper. When it comes to the post-op pneumonia, we can probably do that study for less than $3 million. And that includes the advancement of FDA approval, not just the study itself. So why is it so cheap for us? Well, because it's not invasive. You're not ingesting a pill. There's literally, if the patient is sitting there breathing, which I hope he is or she is, then there is no risk to them whatsoever because all they are doing is breathing in a bag and we don't have any of those associated costs with risk factors. And so it's as simple as tacking on anybody for a clinical trial for lung cancer screening. It's as simple as tackling our breath test to any of that workflow that's already being done. We're not changing anything. We're just telling a patient to give one breath. And we've never had any patients thus far in any of the trials that we've done say, no, I don't want to breathe in a bag. So
you've worked with over 800. It sounds like you would need 15 to 20,000. When you think about that clinical trial, do you already have the team members in place? I know that could be a very sophisticated process working with the FDA and setting up the clinical trial. Or are you putting those team members in place with this funding round?
This funding round will be used to commercialize as quickly as possible. And the reason for that is to de-risk investors, right? If we're asking investors to spend $15, $20 million on this trial and have to wait 3 to 4 years, it's not as attractive. But if we can drive valuation by proving that this is a platform, for example, in a research use only setting, as well as FDA approval for pneumonia, that price tag is the barrier to entry is so low. There's nothing that exists, so we can arguably submit and get breakthrough designation. So that is probably the pathway we want to pursue because then we protect investors. Once we're approved as a platform, as a device that can detect post-op pneumonia in cardiac surgery, then people will believe it even more. So when they invest now, they're not just investing in a company that's still in R&D. And then that's when we'll pursue the lung cancer screening trial.
Now, I think that's really an awesome idea to think about going on the research only, where you're not in the clinical setting and you don't need to have those clinical approvals. And now you're getting more data points as well. From all of the patients that you have worked with over the years, do you have any preliminary data or data points or endpoints that you can share with us around being able to detect lung cancer? I know that they require these massive, large scale studies, but what have you seen in the data thus far?
So not only can we detect early stage cancers, but across those 800 patients, the biomarkers that we're specifically looking for, that we quantify, we're seeing a 94% sensitivity, which is the current standard of care. The low-dose CT is 94% sensitivity and a specificity of 85%. So it's definitely better than the standard of care currently. That's the data that we have. And, I probably shouldn't share the story, but there was an instance with one of our founders. He's a thoracic surgeon. And all the signs pointed to his patient not having cancer, including a biopsy. The biopsy showed as negative, but the breath test showed a positive. And because of the size of the tumor, our thoracic surgeon said, you know what, I still think we should cut this out because what's the worst case? We cut it out. It's a little bit invasive, but in best case, we save your life. When they took that tumor out and analyzed it and biopsied the whole tumor, it was cancerous. And our breath test said it was positive, but every other, call it point of current diagnostics, said it was negative. Because when you do a biopsy, you could miss, right? You might hit a small part of that tumor that doesn't have the cancer, but the rest of it does. And so that's what happened. And that will also be a challenge for our lung cancer screening trial. Because again, there's nothing else like it that can detect something as early as we can.
You mentioned that only 6% of people who are basically allowed to get or meet all the requirements to get a screening for lung cancer, only about 6% of people end up getting it. Yeah. If we looked at that universe of 100% people that are applicable to get the lung cancer test, how many people is that every year if we want to think about kind of market opportunity?
Well, it's under the current guidelines, which has since been expanded. It used to be 15 million. Last year or the year before they changed it. So it's 20 million Americans who qualify today. And I expect that number to grow because you're seeing it right now. I'm seeing it right now in the medical community whereby cancer rates are rising. And it's not just smokers anymore. The minority class, African Americans, especially women, are getting lung cancer without even being a smoker. In Europe, we have kids getting lung cancer. And so it's, the trend used to be going down and now it's kind of plateaued and kind of on the way up again. So I would argue it's much more than that. But from a recommended guideline perspective, it's 20 million Americans who currently qualify today for annual lung cancer screening.
if you think about what success looks like for this business over the next, call it 2 to 3 years, what does that look like?
It will be proving ourselves and getting FDA approved as a breath diagnostics platform. And from there, we can begin the lung cancer clinical trials. We're super confident in the data. But aside from just pneumonia, I would love to pursue other opportunities for other diseases, because we know, like, we're not the only company. We're just the company with the best technology to accurately and repeatedly quantify these biomarkers because of our processes. So I would love to see this commercialized. That's first and foremost. And then from there, we have a spider web called almost a hub and spoke, where we do the analysis of it. And now we have labs across the country that can analyze these samples. So when the next wave, for example, but I didn't explain this, we can detect COVID as well, or research has been shown to be able to detect COVID. So at the next stage, if there's another virus out there, we can use our platform, our hub and spoke model, to do that. And what I would really love to do, and I know our chief medical officer is going to challenge me on this because he's a very much FDA guy. We have a director that was the ex-CMS director under the Bush administration, so they understand the reimbursement pathways. But from a monitoring perspective, I believe in longevity and health. I would love for people to, at the very least, take a baseline breath test within the next 2-3 years. Doesn't have to be covered. Just take the test. We'll make it super cheap. And if any of those biomarkers, take another test a year later, if any of the biomarkers that we know might cause disease or associate with disease start rising, we want that patient to come in and get checked out. That would be my ultimate goal.
For those investors, who are on the line, they're not sure they want to come in yet. I always like to do this. I'll give you the last word. What do you want them to know? What do you want them to hear?
Well, I think the most important part is companies are valued based on what the investor perceives that value to be. When you take a look at companies like Grail, when you take a look at companies like Exact Sciences with genomics, they raised a bunch of capital and they were valued at like $300 to $600 million before any FDA trials, because they were saying that we could be a platform technology. I want investors to know that outside of the risk, if we're successful on pneumonia or if we're not successful on lung cancer, we are not here just as a one-stop shop for those indications. We are a platform technology. And part of me, so I didn't explain this earlier when you asked, but I have a capital markets background. So I always look at what's the most amount of reward with the least amount of risk, and how do we protect investors? So I would love to be a public company within the next 6 months, because as a public company, you can drive higher valuations. You can give people who invest today a chance to exit your stock if they don't want to wait. But at the same time, I believe that companies such as yourself that are doing game-changing things should be owned by people and should be owned by anybody. And that way they can support our cause and our mission. And our goal, of course, is to make sure that our stock price performs when we're public so that everybody has a chance to win.
If you like what you heard on the show today, you can check out why Breath Diagnostics received a 3.2 out of 5 on our proprietary rating scale at Kingscrowd.com. You can also invest on Equifund until March 31st, 2026. And as always, if you liked what you heard on the show today, please like, subscribe, and share our podcast wherever you listen so more investors like you can find us. Thanks for tuning in, and happy investing.